The briefing room fell silent except for the steady hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Lieutenant Commander Valentina Viper Kalin stood at the front, her flight suit crisp despite the early hour auburn hair pulled back in regulation perfection. The PowerPoint slide behind her showed satellite imagery of a mountainous region that meant nothing to most people in the room. To her, it was everything. Target acquisition will occur at 5:30 hours, she began, her voice cutting through the morning fog of caffeine-deprived Navy SEALs. Weather conditions favor a southeastern approach, utilizing the ridge line for cover until. A snicker from the back row. Lieutenant Marcus Tank Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, sharing a knowing look with his teammate. "Ma'am, with all due respect," he interrupted, his tone carrying just enough deference to avoid insubordination. "We've run mountain extractions before. Maybe save the Flight School 101 for the rookies." The room shifted uncomfortably. Viper's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her green eyes remained steady on the satellite image. She'd heard it all before. The whispers in mess halls, the sideways glances when she walked into tactical planning sessions, the unspoken assumption that her presence was some diversity initiative rather than 37 confirmed kills and a silver star. "Copy that, Tank," she replied evenly, using his call sign with surgical precision. "I'm sure your ground experience gives you unique insights into air-to-surface targeting solutions from 20,000 feet." Another SEAL, Chief Petty Officer David Bulldog Morrison, cleared his throat. "Look, Viper, we appreciate the intel brief, but this op is straightforward. In and out, minimal air support needed. We've got this handled." What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that 3 floors below them, in a windowless room marked only with numbers and security clearance requirements, Admiral Rebecca Hayes was reviewing files that would make their blood run cold. Operation Nightfall wasn't just another extraction mission. It was a test. A very specific test designed by minds that thought in decades rather than deployment cycles. The scenario Viper was briefing hadn't been chosen randomly. Every coordinate, every tactical approach, every weather window had been carefully selected to match something that existed only in the deepest vaults of naval intelligence. Something that had been classified so far above their pay grade that even knowing it existed would require congressional oversight. But Admiral Hayes knew. And she'd handpicked Viper for reasons that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with a humid night in Afghanistan 3 years ago, when a young pilot had improvised her way through an impossible situation, saving 12 Marines with tactics that should have gotten her court-martialed instead of decorated. The mission briefing continued, but the real story was just beginning. Tank shifted in his seat, checking his watch with practiced military impatience. The morning sun streamed through reinforced windows, casting long shadows across tactical maps spread on metal tables. Outside, the rhythmic wop-wop-wop of rotor blades announced the arrival of their transport helicopter, right on schedule. "Our insertion point is here," Viper continued, her laser pointer dancing across the topographical display. "LZ Alpha, approximately 2 clicks from the primary objective. The terrain is classified as severely disadvantageous. Loose shale, 70-degree gradients, with seasonal mudslides documented every spring for the past decade." She clicked to the next slide, revealing weather satellite data that painted an ominous picture. Current meteorological analysis shows wind shear increasing throughout the operational window, gusts up to 45 knots, shifting directions every 6 minutes. Visibility drops to near zero above the cloud deck at Angels 15. Bulldog leaned forward, finally paying attention despite himself. Weather was the great equalizer, the one variable that humbled even the most experienced operators. "What's our backup, LZ, if conditions deteriorate?" "There isn't one," Viper replied flatly. "Nearest suitable landing zone is 17 miles northeast, which puts us outside our fuel margin for extraction." She paused, letting that sink in. "This is a one-shot operation, gentlemen. We get one approach, one landing, one takeoff. Miss any of those marks and we're walking home through Taliban territory." Tank's smirk finally disappeared. He'd been on enough operations to recognize when someone was describing a suicide mission wrapped in military optimism. "Ma'am, are you saying?" "I'm saying the margin for error is exactly zero," she cut him off. "Which is why every detail matters. Every briefing point I'm covering could be the difference between extraction and explanation letters to families." The room grew quieter. Outside, aircraft engines wound up to operational tempo, their turbine whine building toward that particular frequency that every pilot knew meant business. Real business. Viper clicked to her final slide. A photograph of a single Apache helicopter silhouetted against a dawn sky, its weapon systems visible in stark profile. "My bird will provide overwatch and close air support throughout the operation. She's been modified for high-altitude performance, upgraded engines, reinforced rotors, extended fuel capacity. Call sign, Ghost Rider." She turned to face them directly, and for the first time, Tank noticed something in her eyes that he'd missed before. Not uncertainty or inexperience, but the kind of calm that only came from having stared death in the face and walked away. The briefing was over, but the real education was about to begin. The tarmac buzzed with pre-mission intensity as equipment was loaded and final checks completed. Viper walked her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision, her hands running along the Apache's frame like a surgeon examining a patient. Every rivet, every sensor, every weapon mounting point received her personal attention. The AH-64E Guardian was a masterpiece of controlled lethality. Its twin General Electric T700 GE7 O1D engines hummed with barely restrained power, each capable of producing 1,700 shaft horsepower. The aircraft's sleek profile cut an intimidating silhouette against the morning sky. Its four-blade main rotor system, designed for maximum maneuverability in the thin mountain air they'd soon be navigating. "Weapons check complete," called out Warrant Officer Elena Wrench Vasquez, Viper's gunner and the only person on base who'd never questioned her competence. Wrench had flown with Viper through 3 deployments, watching her pilot their aircraft through situations that would have broken lesser aviators. 30mm cannon loaded with 300 rounds, Hellfire missiles armed and ready, Hydra rockets prepped for danger-close support. Viper nodded, continuing her walk around. The longbow radar system mounted above the rotor mast gave Ghost Rider capabilities that most ground forces couldn't even comprehend. It could track multiple targets simultaneously, engage threats beyond visual range, and coordinate with other aircraft in ways that transformed individual helicopters into nodes in a larger network of destruction. Across the tarmac, the SEAL team was conducting their own preparations. Tank checked his equipment with the same methodical approach Viper used on her aircraft: M4A1 carbine, night vision systems, communications gear, medical supplies. Despite his earlier dismissiveness, he was a professional, and professionals prepared for every contingency. "Radio check," Bulldog's voice crackled over the comm system. "Ghost Rider, this is Anvil Team, how copy?" Viper keyed her headset. "Anvil Team, Ghost Rider reads you 5x5, standing by for departure clearance." The morning air carried the scent of jet fuel and desert dust, a combination that triggered memories for everyone on the team. Different memories, but equally vivid. For the SEALs, it was the smell of insertion points and firefights. For Viper, it was the moment when Earth fell away and sky became everything. "Ghost Rider Tower," the air traffic controller's voice was crisp and professional. "You are cleared for immediate departure. Vector heading 270, climb and maintain altitude at pilot's discretion. Weather advisories remain in effect for your operational area." Tower, Ghost Rider copies. Departing controlled airspace at pilot's discretion. The Apache lifted off with mechanical grace, its rotor wash kicking up debris in perfect circles around the landing pad. As they climbed, Viper felt the familiar transition from earthbound concerns to three-dimensional thinking. Up here, problems became geometry, solutions became physics, and survival became mathematics calculated at 200 miles per hour. But today's equation had variables she wasn't allowed to know about yet. The landscape below shifted from military-based geometry to desert sprawl, then gradually to the foothills that would eventually become the mountains where everything would change. Viper maintained steady communication with air traffic control while monitoring weather updates that grew more ominous with each transmission. Ghost Rider, be advised, Weather Station Alpha reports wind shear increasing beyond forecast parameters. Recommend mission delay until conditions improve. Viper glanced at her instruments, then at the tactical display showing the SEAL team's transport helicopter maintaining formation off her port side. The Chinook looked massive compared to her Apache, its twin rotors churning through air that was becoming increasingly turbulent as they approached the mountain range. Negative control, she replied after a moment's consideration. Weather window is already marginal. Delay puts us into the afternoon thermal patterns, which analysis shows will be significantly worse. Behind her, Wrench was monitoring multiple radio frequencies, tracking intelligence updates, and maintaining situational awareness of their expanding operational environment. Viper, I'm picking up increased radio chatter from the target area. Could be routine, but the pattern suggests elevated activity. Copy that, keep monitoring. The radio crackled again, this time with Tank's voice from the Chinook. Ghost Rider, Anvil lead. We're showing some pretty significant turbulence up ahead. Your bird handling okay? There it was again, the subtle questioning of her capabilities, wrapped in professional concern. Viper had learned to hear it in a dozen different phrasings over the years. The assumption that her aircraft handling might be the weak link in the operational chain. Anvil lead, Ghost Rider is green across the board, she replied smoothly. Apache systems are designed for these conditions. Chinook might want to consider altitude adjustment if you're experiencing handling issues. A pause on the radio, then Tank's voice again, slightly strained. Copy that, Ghost Rider. The mountains rose ahead like sleeping giants, their peaks disappearing into cloud cover that looked deceptively peaceful from a distance. Viper knew better. Those clouds represented wind currents that could flip an aircraft upside down in seconds, visibility conditions that could disorient even experienced pilots, and weather systems that changed faster than forecasters could track. Ghost Rider, Overwatch. A new voice joined their frequency. This was the command and control aircraft circling at 30,000 feet, monitoring the operation through sensors that could see through clouds and darkness. Be advised, your operational area is experiencing significant electromagnetic interference. Satellite communications may be intermittent. Overwatch, Ghost Rider copies, switching to backup navigation systems now. Wrench looked up from her displays. That's odd. Intel briefings didn't mention any activity in this region. Viper's instincts, honed through hundreds of combat hours, began sending warning signals that had nothing to do with weather or terrain. Operations that developed complications before reaching the target area had a tendency to develop worse complications once boots hit the ground. The first mountain peak passed beneath them, its rocky face scarred by centuries of wind and weather. They were committed now, flying into uncertainty at 140 knots with no way back except through whatever waited ahead. At exactly 8:47 hours, everything changed. All aircraft, this is Overwatch with priority traffic. The voice from the orbiting command aircraft carried an urgency that made everyone's blood pressure spike. We have unscheduled air activity in your operational sector. Multiple contacts, unknown intentions, closing on your position from the northeast. Viper's hands moved across her controls with practiced efficiency, switching to combat mode without conscious thought. Overwatch, Ghost Rider requesting immediate classification on those contacts. Are we looking at hostile intent? Ghost Rider, stand by for classification. The pause stretched long enough for heart rates to double. In the tactical aviation world, unknown aircraft in an operational area meant potential surface-to-air missiles, enemy fighters, or at minimum, a compromised mission that would require immediate extraction. Ghost Rider Overwatch. Contacts classified as military aircraft, non-friendly designation, armed and approaching your position at high speed. Recommend immediate course correction to avoid engagement. Tank's voice cut across the radio frequency with undisguised alarm. Ghost Rider, are you telling us we just flew into a hot zone without intel? Before Viper could respond, Wrench's voice crackled through the intercom with information that made everyone's blood run cold. Viper, I'm reading multiple radar locks. Someone down there knows exactly where we are, and they're painting us with targeting systems. The Apache's threat warning system began emitting the particular electronic whine that every combat pilot learned to fear, the sound of guided missiles being prepared for launch. Viper's training took over, her body moving through defensive maneuvers while her mind calculated options that were rapidly diminishing. Anvil Team, Ghost Rider, you need to get that Chinook to the deck immediately. We have confirmed hostile radar locks. Ghost Rider, Anvil Lead. Chinook is too heavy for nap of the Earth flying in these conditions. We need an alternative. There was no alternative. The mission planners had designed this operation with surgical precision, accounting for every variable except the one that was now threatening to kill them all. Viper banked hard left, using the mountain terrain to break the radar locks while buying precious seconds to think. That's when she saw them. 3 aircraft rising from the valley ahead, their silhouettes unmistakable against the morning sky. Mi-24 Hinds, Soviet-era attack helicopters that had been upgraded with modern weapons systems and flown by pilots who knew these mountains like their own backyards. Overwatch, Ghost Rider has visual on 3 enemy Hinds, bearing 045, altitude approximately Angels 8 and climbing. They're moving to intercept. The tactical situation had just transformed from routine extraction to aerial combat against odds that would have been considered unfair if they'd been reversed. 3 enemy aircraft against 1 Apache and a transport helicopter that was about as maneuverable as a flying school bus. Viper's mind raced through the possibilities, calculating engagement envelopes, missile ranges, and escape routes that might keep her team alive for the next 10 minutes. The Hinds were closing fast, and time was running out. Anvil Team, Ghost Rider, I need you to trust me completely for the next 5 minutes. Can you do that? Tank's response came after a pause that felt like forever. Ghost Rider, Anvil Lead, we're listening. Break formation now. Descend to the valley floor and follow my lead. Do not deviate from my flight path regardless of what you see or hear. The Chinook's survival depends on staying in my rotor wash. Ghost Rider, that's not standard. Anvil Lead, there is no standard for this situation. Trust me or die. Those are your options. The Chinook pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Jake Steady Coleman, had been flying heavy-lift helicopters for 15 years. He'd never taken tactical advice from an attack helicopter pilot, but something in Viper's voice convinced him that today was not the time to start questioning unconventional wisdom. Ghost Rider, steady copies, following your lead. Viper pushed the Apache into a steep dive toward the valley floor, watching her airspeed indicator climb past operational limits, while the radar altimeter spun down toward numbers that would make safety inspectors weep. Behind her, the massive Chinook followed, its twin rotors fighting the turbulent air created by the Apache's aggressive maneuvering. The first Hind opened fire at 8:51 hours. Tracer rounds streaked past the Apache's canopy, each glowing trajectory marking a near miss that could have ended everything. Viper yanked the aircraft into a vertical climb, using the mountain face as cover while the hind pilot tried to adjust his firing solution. Wrench target the lead hind, Hellfire when ready. Target acquired, missile away. The AGM-114 Hellfire missile streaked from its rail mount, its solid propellant motor leaving a thin contrail as it tracked toward the enemy aircraft. The hind pilot saw it coming and deployed countermeasures, chaff and flares designed to confuse the missile's guidance system. It didn't work. The Hellfire's warhead detonated against the hind's engine compartment, transforming 17 tons of military helicopter into a fireball that tumbled toward the valley floor trailing smoke and debris. One down, two to go, but the remaining enemy pilots had learned from their wingman's mistake. Ghost Rider, I have multiple missile launches, Wrench reported with professional calm that masked the fact they were about to die. 2 inbound, tracking solutions nominal. Viper threw the Apache into a maneuver that no flight manual had ever described, using the mountain terrain like a giant slalom course, while enemy missiles tried to adjust their trajectories to match her impossible flight path. The aircraft's airframe groaned under G-forces that pushed both pilot and gunner to the edge of consciousness. Anvil team, status report, she managed through gritted teeth. Ghost Rider, we're still with you but barely. Steady's flying this thing like it's a fighter jet. Tank's voice carried a new tone, not respect exactly, but the beginning of understanding that their survival was completely dependent on the woman they'd been mocking 20 minutes earlier. The second missile detonated against a cliff face 50 feet from their position, close enough to rock the Apache with the concussion blast, but far enough away to keep them airborne. The third missile lost its target lock entirely, spiraling off into empty sky before self-destructing over uninhabited terrain. But the surviving hinds were adjusting their tactics, splitting up to attack from multiple vectors simultaneously. Wrench, paint the northern target. I'll handle his wingman. Roger, target locked. The dance of aerial combat played out against a backdrop of snow-capped peaks and morning shadows, each aircraft trying to gain the positional advantage that would determine who lived and who became a crater in the mountainside. Viper's Apache moved through three-dimensional space like a deadly ballet, every control input calculated to maintain offensive capability while denying the enemy a clean shot. The northern hind exploded in a satisfying fireball as Wrench's second Hellfire found its mark, but the southern aircraft had maneuvered into an attack position that left the Chinook exposed and vulnerable. That's when Viper did something that would be analyzed in military aviation schools for decades to come. Instead of engaging the remaining hind directly, she positioned her Apache between the enemy aircraft and the Chinook, using her own helicopter as a shield while simultaneously targeting the threat. It was tactically insane, strategically brilliant, and required flying skills that existed in fewer than a dozen pilots worldwide. The hind pilot, faced with an Apache that was simultaneously blocking his shot and targeting him for destruction, made the mistake of hesitating for exactly 2 seconds. In aerial combat, 2 seconds was a lifetime. Viper's 30 cannon spoke with mechanical authority, sending a stream of high-explosive rounds into the hind's cockpit area. The enemy aircraft disintegrated in midair, its debris raining down into the valley below like metallic snow. Silence returned to the radio frequency, broken only by the steady rhythm of rotor blades and the sound of controlled breathing from operators who had just watched their assumptions about competence and gender get blown apart along with 3 enemy helicopters. Ghost Rider, Anvil lead. Tank's voice was different now, carrying something that might have been the beginning of respect. That was exceptional flying. Anvil lead, Ghost Rider. Mission continues. We have a schedule to keep. But as they resumed course toward the target area, Viper couldn't shake the feeling that the aerial engagement had been exactly what someone had expected to happen. The Hinds had appeared at precisely the right time, in precisely the right place, with precisely the right tactical approach to test her abilities under maximum stress. 3 floors below the briefing room they'd left behind, Admiral Hayes was reviewing gun camera footage transmitted in real time from Ghost Rider's engagement. Every maneuver, every decision, every impossible moment when survival had required skills that couldn't be taught in any flight school. The test was proceeding exactly as designed. The target landing zone emerged from morning mist like something from a tactical planning nightmare. LZ Alpha was a small clearing carved into the mountainside, barely large enough for the Chinook's rotor diameter, and surrounded by terrain that would challenge even the most experienced pilots under perfect conditions. These were not perfect conditions. Ghost Rider steady. I'm reading wind shear that's off the charts. This LZ is marginal at best. Viper circled the landing zone at 500 feet, her experienced eyes reading the landscape for signs that weather reports couldn't capture. Dust patterns indicated wind direction changes every 30 seconds. The clearing's edges showed recent rockfall damage. Most concerning, the approach angle required flying between 2 cliff faces, with less than a rotor diameter of clearance on each side. Anvil Team, Ghost Rider. I'm going to make an approach pass to check conditions. Stay high and observe. Roger, Ghost Rider. The Apache descended toward the landing zone like a controlled missile, Viper's hands making constant corrections as wind gusts tried to slam them into the surrounding rock walls. Her altitude readings showed margins measured in feet rather than the comfortable buffers that safety regulations required. Wrench, talk to me about the LZ surface conditions. Scanning now. Shit, Viper, the ground is softer than intel indicated. I'm reading subsurface moisture that could turn this whole area into a mud pit once the Chinook's downwash hits it. The tactical picture was becoming clearer, and none of it was good news. The landing zone was barely suitable for their aircraft, definitely unsuitable for the Chinook, and surrounded by terrain that offered no alternatives within their fuel range. Anvil Lead, Ghost Rider. I need your team to consider alternative insertion methods. Ghost Rider, what alternatives? We're carrying equipment loads that require helicopter transport. Viper pulled the Apache into a hover above the landing zone, watching the ground conditions through her targeting system, while her mind worked through options that ranged from difficult to impossible. The mission required the SEAL team to reach a specific location within a specific time frame, to extract a high-value intelligence asset who might or might not still be alive. Anvil Team, I can insert you individually using the Apache's external cargo points. It's not standard, it's not comfortable, but it gets you on the ground without risking the Chinook in this LZ. Tank's voice carried disbelief. Ghost Rider, are you suggesting we ride your aircraft into a hostile area like some kind of taxi service? Anvil Lead, I'm suggesting we complete the mission with the resources available rather than aborting, because the easy option isn't feasible. A pause on the radio while the SEAL team considered options that their training had never covered. Individual insertion via attack helicopter was theoretical at best, insane at worst, and definitely not covered in any standard operating procedures. Ghost Rider, Anvil Lead, how many personnel can you transport per trip? 2 operators maximum, plus equipment. 3 round trips to get your entire team inserted. That's 30 minutes of exposure time for individual team members. Not optimal. Anvil Lead, nothing about this operation is optimal. We adapt or we fail. Bulldog's voice joined the conversation. Ghost Rider, what's your assessment of enemy activity in the area after our earlier engagement? It was a good question that highlighted the complexity of their situation. The destroyed Hinds would be reported missing eventually, triggering search and rescue operations that could flood the area with hostiles within hours. Unknown enemy strength, unknown response timeline, Viper replied honestly. But every minute we spend discussing alternatives is a minute closer to compromise. Tank made the decision that would define the rest of the operation. Ghost Rider, Anvil lead, will take the taxi service. Insert priority sequence. Bulldog and Rodriguez first, then Martinez and Thompson, then myself and Wilson. Copy Anvil lead, coming around for first pickup. The Apache's external cargo points had never been designed for human transport, but desperate situations called for creative interpretations of equipment limitations. As Viper maneuvered into position alongside the Chinook, she wondered what military regulation they were about to violate and whether they'd live long enough for anyone to file the paperwork. The first insertion went smoother than anyone had predicted. Bulldog and Rodriguez rappelled from the Chinook onto the Apache's external cargo points with the efficiency that came from countless training repetitions, even if none of those repetitions had involved hanging from an attack helicopter while flying through mountain terrain. Passengers secure, Wrench reported, though I'm pretty sure this violates about 17 safety regulations. Wrench, everything about today violates safety regulations. Let's focus on staying alive instead of staying legal. The Apache descended toward the landing zone with 2 Navy SEALs clinging to its external mounts like armored barnacles. Viper's flying had to be perfect. Any sudden maneuver could dislodge her passengers, and any gentle approach might not compensate for the wind conditions that were growing worse by the minute. Anvil passengers were 60 seconds from insertion. Be ready to detach and move to cover immediately upon touchdown. Bulldog's voice was strained but professional. Copy, Ghost Rider, will be ready. The landing zone rushed up to meet them, wind indicators showing gusts that were pushing aircraft handling beyond normal parameters. Viper flared the Apache at exactly the right moment, bleeding off airspeed while fighting crosswinds that tried to slam them into the cliff face. Touchdown was controlled violence, the aircraft's landing gear making contact with ground that was softer than expected. Bulldog and Rodriguez detached from their cargo points and moved to defensive positions with the fluid grace of operators who'd done this dance in 100 different environments. Anvil elements inserted, moving to overwatch positions, Bulldog reported. LZ is secure for now. Copy, coming around for second pickup. As Viper lifted off for the return trip to the Chinook, she noticed something that intelligence briefs hadn't mentioned. Fresh tire tracks in the mud near the tree line, indicating recent vehicle activity in an area that was supposed to be uninhabited. Overwatch, Ghost Rider. I have evidence of recent ground activity in the operational area. Recommend heightened alert status. Ghost Rider, Overwatch copies. Intelligence update. Target asset has not reported in for past 12 hours. Mission parameters remain unchanged. Translation. They were flying into a situation that was becoming more dangerous by the minute to extract someone who might already be dead. But the mission continued, because someone with more rank than sense had decided that the intelligence value justified the risk. The second insertion proceeded without incident, but the third revealed complications that would test every skill Viper had developed over 8 years of military aviation. As she approached the Chinook for the final pickup, Tank and Wilson secured to the Apache's cargo points. The radio erupted with traffic that changed everything. All aircraft Overwatch. We have ground movement in the target area. Multiple vehicles, estimated 12 to 15 personnel, moving toward the extraction site. Time to compromise is approximately 15 minutes. Tank's voice carried the weight of leadership decisions made under impossible circumstances. Ghost Rider, can you get us to the target faster than planned? Viper looked at her instruments. Calculated fuel consumption versus airspeed. and considered the tactical implications of arriving at a potentially compromised extraction site ahead of schedule. Anvil lead. I can get you there in 8 minutes if you can handle some unconventional flying. Define unconventional. Terrain following at speeds that will make your dental work rattle. Maximum performance profile through mountain terrain that was never intended for high-speed transit. A pause, then Tank's voice with something that might have been trust. Ghost Rider Anvil lead. Light the fires and kick the tires. We'll hang on. The Apache accelerated toward the mountains at maximum power, carrying 2 Navy SEALs who were discovering that faith in their pilot was becoming less optional and more essential with every passing second. Behind them, the Chinook followed at a more conservative speed, its crew monitoring radio traffic that suggested their mission window was closing faster than anyone had anticipated. The target building materialized through morning haze like a concrete monument to questionable intelligence decisions. 3 stories of Soviet-era architecture. It squatted on a mountainside plateau that offered excellent fields of fire in all directions, and absolutely no cover for approaching forces. Anvil elements, Ghost Rider. I have visual on the objective, also visual on 4 vehicles positioned around the perimeter. This is not an undefended extraction. Tank's voice carried the grim acceptance of a professional who'd walked into bad situations before. Ghost Rider, Anvil lead. Set us down 200 meters from the building. We'll approach on foot. Negative, Anvil lead. That approach puts you in a kill zone with no cover and no support. Ghost Rider, we don't have alternatives. The mission requires. Anvil lead. The mission requires getting your team and the asset out alive. Everything else is negotiable. Viper circled the target area at a distance that kept them outside small arms range, while her tactical brain processed options that the mission planners had never considered. The building's architecture offered opportunities for someone willing to think outside the conventional framework of ground-based assault tactics. Wrench, can you get targeting solutions on the perimeter vehicles from our current position? Affirmative. 4 vehicles, all showing heat signatures consistent with recently operated engines. Personnel movement visible around all positions. Anvil lead, Ghost Rider. I'm going to create some alternatives for your approach. Stand by for fireworks. The first Hellfire missile impacted the northernmost vehicle with devastating precision, its explosion sending a fireball skyward that would be visible for miles. Before the defending forces could react, the second missile eliminated the southern position with equal effectiveness. Anvil lead, your northern and southern approaches are now clear. I recommend immediate movement while the enemy is still figuring out what happened. Tank and Wilson detached from the Apache's cargo points while the aircraft was still moving, hitting the ground in perfect combat rolls that carried them toward cover positions with the fluid grace of operators who'd done this so many times it was muscle memory. Anvil elements inserted and moving toward objective, Tank reported. Ghost Rider, can you maintain Overwatch? Copy, Anvil lead. Ghost Rider is your guardian angel. As the SEAL team advanced toward the building, Viper maintained a defensive orbit that kept her Apache positioned to provide immediate fire support, while monitoring radio frequencies for signs that their presence had been reported to larger enemy forces. The tactical radio crackled with updates from Bulldog and Rodriguez, who had established Overwatch positions during the earlier insertions. Anvil lead, Overwatch North. I have visual on multiple personnel inside the target building. Count approximately 8 individuals, unknown disposition. Overwatch North, are you able to identify our asset? Negative, Anvil lead. Too much interference from building structure. The mission was reaching its critical phase, where all the planning and preparation would be tested against the reality of combat operations in hostile territory. Everything depended on the next 10 minutes. Tank and Wilson reached the building's perimeter wall, taking cover positions that provided observation of the main entrance while remaining concealed from the defenders inside. The intelligence briefing had indicated that their target asset, a CIA operative with access to terrorist financial networks, was being held on the building's second floor. Anvil Lead, Overwatch South. I have movement on the building's roof. 2 personnel with what appears to be communications equipment. Copy Overwatch South. Tank keyed his radio with a request that would test Viper's precision flying abilities beyond anything they'd experienced so far. Ghost Rider, Anvil Lead. I need you to eliminate the roof positions without damaging the building structure. Our asset could be anywhere inside. It was a sniper shot with a 30mm cannon, requiring precision that pushed both pilot and weapon system to their absolute limits. Viper adjusted her orbit to bring the Apache's gun within optimal range, while accounting for wind conditions that were still gusting unpredictably. Anvil Lead, Ghost Rider. I can take the shot, but I need 10 seconds of steady wind conditions. Can you wait? Negative, Ghost Rider. They're setting up what looks like anti-aircraft systems. If they get those online, we lose air support entirely. There was no choice. Viper lined up the shot using instruments and instinct in equal measure, her finger resting on the trigger control while she waited for the brief moment when wind conditions might allow the precision required. Wrench marked the targets. Targets marked. Range 800 meters, elevation angle 12 degrees, wind gusting from the northeast at variable speeds. Viper squeezed the trigger. The M230 chain gun fired 3 controlled bursts, each round following a trajectory calculated to eliminate the roof-mounted threats without penetrating into the building's interior structure. The first burst eliminated one position, the second took out the communications equipment, and the third removed the final threat. Anvil Lead, Ghost Rider. Roof positions neutralized. You have a clean approach. Outstanding shooting, Ghost Rider. Moving to breach. Tank and Wilson advanced on the building's main entrance using tactical movement that had been perfected through years of training and combat experience. The breach proceeded with practiced efficiency, explosive charges placed with surgical precision, entry coordinated to maximize surprise while minimizing exposure. Anvil Lead were inside the building, beginning room-to-room search for the asset. What they found inside would haunt them for years to come. The building's interior told a story that intelligence briefings had failed to capture. Recent signs of occupation were everywhere, sleeping areas for a dozen people, communications equipment more sophisticated than anything terrorist organizations should have possessed, and documentation that suggested this location had been used for activities far beyond holding a single CIA operative. Anvil Lead, Overwatch North. Multiple vehicles approaching from the Valley Road. Count 6 vehicles, unknown personnel strength. Tank's voice carried the weight of tactical decisions made under time pressure. Copy, Overwatch North. Time to compromise. Estimate 12 minutes until arrival. Ghost Rider, Anvil Lead. We need more time to complete the search. Can you delay those vehicles? Viper looked at her fuel gauges, calculated ammunition remaining, and considered the tactical implications of engaging ground targets without proper intelligence about their capabilities. Anvil Lead, Ghost Rider. I can slow them down, but not indefinitely. Find your asset and be ready.